Okay. Hey, one more lunch. You adobo. Oh, cringe fiction.
How's it, everybody? Welcome back into the Paper Plane Inn. As you can tell from the music stream that is still going, welcome back into another session where we're going to be continuing where we left off with reading Silent Ponyville 2, and with a couple more chapters from chapter 4, 5, and possibly 6.
Right, that one.
Yep. It's not that we're not completely all there yet, honey.
Yeah. As much as I'd like to stay for that, my lunch is starting to wrap up. I just popped in here to say hello and wish you luck.
Thank you very much, honey.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, Sherm or Morris here will pop in sooner or later.
Of course. You have a good day now, all right?
I'll try. I should be done here within the next 2 or 3 hours,
Mm.
and then we can get ourselves ready for the big show. And I'll need to get all my cursing out of the way, because if that swear jar is real, oh boy, I'm gonna be pissed.
Oh dear.
All right. See you soon, hun.
All
Love
right.
you.
See you soon.
Mm.
Hmm.
You were very snuggly this morning also. It was adorable.
Well, that's getting colder.
I've noticed, and I like it.
Okay. Now.
Florida!
Well, there he goes. He disappeared into the void. Welcome back, everybody, into another chapter into another stream where we're going to be continuing where we left off with Silent Ponyville 2, chapters 4, 5, and maybe possibly 6. This may be a very short stream because I unfortunately have important plans that I need to go do later this afternoon. So there's a reason why this stream is actually moved up to 12 instead of 1 like I usually do back on Wednesdays, or usually where I stream at 3. Duly apologize to that. Now, where we last left off, Silent Ponyville 2 takes place about a month after the first series, that's Silent Ponyville 1, where instead of our protagonist is Pinkie Pie, who has suffered through horrendous nightmares that turned out to be a part of her sister's, part of her psyche, where she endured a traumatic event that deals with her and her sister. And this time, our protagonist for Silent Ponyville 2 was actually Fluttershy this time around, and we are starting to see a little bit more into the mind that is Fluttershy, into her, that possibly delves deep into her trauma, and we can actually see that when it comes to Silent Ponyville 2, we can see some little bit of elements that is like Silent Hill 2 come into a little bit of a play here. I don't know. But it's my kind of observation from what I read here. And it was actually pretty fun. And so far, despite the horrific events that we managed to read through, Silent Ponyville 2 is actually a good read so far. And I have a feeling that, let's see. Oh, that's good. Okay, that's really good, Ricto. Hey there, Bearwall. Welcome back into the inn. You're just about time. And without further ado, I think it's about time we talked enough about Silent Ponyville. I mean, Silent Hill in general. And we've managed to summarize enough when it comes to Silent Ponyville 2. So, with that in mind, I think it's about time we finally continue where we left off and read Silent Ponyville Chapter 2, Chapter 4, where after Fluttershy nearly nearly succumbed to drowning, she managed to find herself the strength to pull herself out of her watery grave and entered into a bizarre location that is reminiscent to Cloudsdale General, where, according to the story, her father worked in there. And and this time, this new location, we're going to be seeing new monsters. Who knows? I guess it's about time we finally get to find out, shall we? Well, let's begin reading with Silent Ponyville 2, Chapter 4. 1 minute, chat. I need to drink this water before I... Perfect. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh as she lay on the floor in the examination room. A towel was draped over her head as she breathed slowly, trying to calm herself down and feel better. She had redressed her wounds. Her cuts had reopened in the water and were slowly healing again. Her muscles still ached through the health drinks that had helped a lot. Her shivering has gone away as well, a sign her body temperature is returning to normal. She had made herself a makeshift fire with some of the leftover gauze and bandages, and using a small bit of the lantern oil to help it burn. The fire had provided her with a gentle comfort, warming her body and calming her mind as the flames danced before her. It wouldn't last for long, but it was serving its purpose. She had hung her bag to help it dry quicker, as well as get all the water out of the music box. She was surprised that she hasn't lost the doll key in that watery mess, though the map of Ponyville was unfurled as well. It was drying as well, though it will never be as quite the same.
I wonder what Rainbow Dash and Pinkie Pie were doing right now.
Fluttershy asked herself, staring into the flames. She was feeling lonely without her friends. She was starting to worry about their safety. This place wasn't welcoming. This place wasn't welcoming. Already she had brushed I'm sorry, chat. This place wasn't welcoming. Already she had brushed with death twice, and both times she had been saved thanks to Rainbow Dash.
Rainbow Dash,
she muttered quietly, closing her eyes to think about her merry friend.
This is it! This is my chance!
Rainbow Dash squealed happily as she held up a poster to Fluttershy. The Wonderbolts will be having an open auditions in 3 months! This is the first time they've ever done this! Apparently, they've been so amazed at the talent of the upcoming flyers that they want to see in person and personally invite the best of them to join with them. Rainbow Dash let out another squeal as she practiced dancing for joy.
That's wonderful, Rainbow Dash.
Fluttershy cheered happily for her.
You'll finally be able to make your dream come true.
I know. I'm going to have to pick up my practice sessions. This is going to have to call for some new tricks, too. Tricks no pony has ever thought of. The most death-defying and out-of-this-world tricks that not any pony has ever seen. Rainbow Dash instantly contemplated anything and everything she could do.
You shouldn't forget about using the sonic rain boom either. You're the only pony in all of Equestria who can perform it. Then they'd let you use it for sure after they've seen that.
Fluttershy happily said. Rainbow stopped her musings when Fluttershy said that, lowering a hoof when she raised it eagerly to the ground. The sonic rain boom, huh? Rainbow scuffed her hoof against the ground, looking a little bit anxious.
What's the matter?
Fluttershy asked, noticing the instant change in her behavior. Well, to be honest, I haven't been able to perform the sonic rain boom since the Best Young Flyers competition. Rainbow Dash seemed to grimace at the mention of her failing to do that move.
Really? You don't remember how you performed it?
It's not that I forget how I did it. Just for some reason, things seems to get too real just as I'm about to perform it. the ground gets too close, or I start to panic about not controlling my speed, or I think I must be onto something to perform only at critical occasions, or... Rainbow Dash's frantic rant was interrupted, and Fluttershy's lips found their way into Rainbow's. Rainbow's face lit up with a blush at this.
I know you can do it, Rainbow Dash. I believe in you.
Fluttershy smiled warmly at her mere friend. Well, I suppose I can give it another try, Dash said, grinning as she blushed heavily. She spread her wings and shot into the sky at a mighty speed. Fluttershy smiled as she watched her, always loving the way Rainbow flew. Rainbow perched herself high up on a cloud, looking over the world. With a quick breath, she sprang up into the air once more, flying around as she began to pick up momentum. Fluttershy watched her flying around, realizing Dash was getting to the feel for the air for the first time. Before Dash stopped high up in the air, almost invisible against the sun. Then she saw the descent. Rainbow was racing straight for the ground at a tremendous speed. Fluttershy watched with anticipation as she could see Rainbow begin to perform the cone of air around her body. Fluttershy almost held her breath. For a moment, it seemed Rainbow hesitated. Fluttershy could see the change in her flight. She put a hoof to her mouth in hesitation. She might go flying backwards. She had so many times before. But at that last moment, it seemed the last-ditch determination fired her eyes and their body stretched forward, and suddenly... a huge explosion ripped through the sky. A circle of color spurting around as a rainbow shot towards the ground, turning right before it would impact into the ground and rocketing to the sky, spurting in a giant rainbow across the sky. Fluttershy cheered, jumping up and down at the amazing sight.
Wait a moment. That explosion.
Fluttershy's head popped up from where she had been laying her on her hooves.
The one that woke me up earlier. That sounded like a lot like a sonic rainbow.
Now she was worried. What reason could Dash have for doing a sonic rainboom here? Unless...
Oh no. Was Dash being chased by the dragon again?
Fluttershy's heart started pounding.
She could be hurt, or trapped, or worse.
Her heart lodged in her throat as she stood up, quickly shaking her head, trying to clear her mind as the towel fell to the floor.
No, I can't think of that way. Rainbow Dash is okay, and I'm sure Pinkie Pie is too. I just have to find them.
Fluttershy looked at what remained of the fire before her. It was flickering with its last embers, and it would die out very soon.
Okay, I should be dry enough, and my things should be dry enough as well. It's time for me to find a way out of here. I had to find my friends.
Fluttershy quickly placed her things back into the slightly damp bag. She made sure to pack some extra gauze, bandages, and health drinks as well, making sure she had more medical supplies with her should anything happen along the way. Instantly, the music box began to hiss and wail with the sound of buzzing bees as the air seemed to grow thick. Fluttershy instantly had to struggle for breath as it felt like the air itself was pressing down hard against her body, trying to strangle the life out of her. Her body felt almost frozen as the pressure felt like it was trying to crush her body. Her head slowly turned, looking down the hallway from where it felt like the pressure was emanating. Her eyes grew wide, and her pupils shrunk, as she could see two piercing red eyes staring back at her. It was a tall, pony-like creature, one that could easily overpower her. Its body was covered with darkness that seemed to flow and crawl around it, almost like dancing flames. As if it stared into as it stared at her, its mouth began to open, revealing a white mouth in a sharp contrast of its black body. Its jagged teeth were bared for her to see. It was grinning at her. It began to walk towards her, each step echoing with a loud thud throughout the hallway. As it drew closer, the air grew thicker, and its presence seemed to crush her further. The very air was pressing down on her, making her legs shake and her breathing stop, and her heart pounded heavily in her chest. As it grew closer, a word echoed through Fluttershy's mind.
Pain.
This creature would bring her pain. She had to run from it. She had to get away, but her hooves were glued into the place.
Pain. 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 Pain.
Why couldn't she run? She had to run. She was going to die if she didn't run, but she was paralyzed by fear. Fear for what? The wrath of this creature? That's what she had to run away from. I need you to be strong right now, all right? Fluttershy's mind snapped back to reality, instantly turning from her hooves, running as fast as she could. She was finally able to get air into her lungs as she quickly ran past the doors around her. The hallway was quickly coming to an end, though. Before her, she could see the staircase to the second floor. She couldn't stop now. She had to run. Her hooves hit heavily against each step as she ran up to the stairs with all her might. She seemed to be getting farther away from the creature. The air was breathable. She wasn't feeling the soul-crushing presence. The music box was slowly growing more quiet. She reached to the top of the stairs, panting as she took the stale air. The world still smelled of mildew and rotting materials, but it was better than being in the presence of that creature. She quickly began to walk down the hallway onto the second floor, where her music box suddenly began to hiss again. She stopped in her tracks, expecting that black creature to appear before her. But slowly, coming into view of her lantern, wasn't a creature. It looked like a nurse. It was wearing the standard Cloudsdale's hospital nurse's uniform, a pink hat with a red cross, and a pink coat that fit well around the body, but ended short of the flank so the cutie mark could be seen. Though there was no cutie mark to be seen, with white stockings on the hind legs and special-made hoof sandals to help keep their steps quiet for patients. However, that's where the similarities ended. For the face, there was a muzzle that covered it. For the face, the nurse was covered with bandages, hiding its eyes and face. But around its mouth was a metal muzzle with holes for air. But it looked like it had been placed there to keep the creature quiet. Its uniform was covered with spots of blood, as if it had attacked something, while its white tail seemed spotless. But most striking of all was that around its neck wore what looked like the black necklace of living flames, as if it had come from the body of the creature before. Her music box began to hiss louder as the creature grew closer. Her head looked back and forth, looking for a way out that didn't involve going back the way she came. Her eyes fell upon the double doors just right in front of her. She jumped at the doors and pressed onto them, praying they opened. The doors swung open as she ran inside, closing the doors behind her. The hissing of her music box died down, as she could still tell the creature was nearby outside. She hoped she wouldn't come breaking the door down, but she now realized she had just set herself up in a trap room. She had jumped into what looked like a supplies closet. However, most of the supplies had fallen into the world's rotten disrepair. Moths flew around the ceiling of the room, as she could smell the blood in the air, but she couldn't see any. She looked around, seeing if there were anything that could possibly hinder her or keep the creature behind the door away from her. Something glinted against the glare of her lantern on one of the shelves.
Huh?
She slowly walked over to the glint of light. It was an orange gemstone with the shape of an eye. It was the only thing in the entire room that hadn't fallen into a state of rotting. In fact, it looked pristine, as if it had been taken care of while everything else fell apart. Something about the gem drew Fluttershy to it, as if it was hypnotizing. The jewels seemed to be watching her. She gulped down her beating heart and placed the gem carefully in her bag. She'd hold on to it. She felt it was important. Alright, before I actually continue, let me take a look at chat. Hey there, Phantom May, welcome back into the inn. Sorry for being late, just finished classes. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Oh, thank you for the hydrate though. I'm gonna redeem that real quick. Alright. I'm gonna need that for the upcoming for the upcoming text we're about to read. Alright. Let's begin. Let's continue. She slowly walked back over to the door and placed her ear against it, trying to hear anything. The hissing of her music box had gone silent, and she didn't hear anything past the door. She opened the door carefully, peeking outside and looking around. The nurse had left. It didn't seem like it had tried to chase after her and break the door down. Fluttershy let out a soft sigh in realizing this. She exited the supply room and continued down the hallway from the direction of the nurse that come. She felt very strongly about not returning the way she had just came from. Moving forward was her only option now. Fluttershy looked around carefully at the doors in the hallway. Many had been boarded up with wooden planks, nails to the frames, making sure no one could enter or exit the rooms. Many looked like they had been sealed in some kind of building material, while others looked like they had been locks and handles that had been broken for ages and wouldn't open. The hallway ended abruptly in the turn. Fluttershy turned with it to continue down the hall. Something immediately struck her eyes as she walked down the hall. She drew closer to it to get a better look at it. When she stopped and stared in surprise. On the wall opposing to the doors was a giant mural of Princess Celestia. She was facing in the okay, my performance is not that good. She was facing the pony looking at the mural with a hoof raised and her eyes spread out with an imposing look above her. Above the mural, in the large letters that looked like a quote she had once said. Life is the right of every pony. We may all bask in the light together. Fluttershy blinked in awe at the mural. She had never seen it before. Not in all the years that she had been to the hospital, at least. Not to mention, something struck her odd about the mural, as if something was missing. Her eyes were missing. In their place were indentations in the wall, as if something was supposed to be placed inside of them. Fluttershy carefully pulled out the orange stone that she had found in the supply closet, carefully fitted into the right eye socket. The stone the stone fit with a click and stayed in place. Now Celestia was only missing with one eye. It was likely that the other eye was somewhere in the hospital. Suddenly, the note from the desk made sense to her. They had locked away the other eye somewhere because Celestia's staring was judging them, as if the mural itself could see something they didn't wanted to see. Fluttershy put a hoof to her chin, though, and thought,
So, I have to find where they locked the gem away, and the only hint I have is the word hide.
Fluttershy looked around in the dark hallway once more, before quickly settling down in the way she was heading. She looked even closer at the doors now, looking for any door that might have some sort of keypad or be open to her to check and see if it would reveal some kind of lock item. Even after another turn in the hallway, none of the doors revealed had any answers. Before opening up to another staircase and heading back down to the first floor, she treaded carefully, expecting another creature to start heading for her if she wasn't careful. The world remained quiet, though. She had came up a hallway that she recognized when she was a filly. It was a testing wing of the hospital, one she remembered frequenting with her mother as she was getting help. In a quiet nostalgia, she began to check on some of the doors in the hallway, and one door opened for her as she walked inside.
Mother!
She came the voice of a little filly. Fluttershy stepped back in shock as she looked at what's happening before her. A ghostly vision of her mother was lying on the bed in the room as a filly version of herself ran up happily next to her bedside. Fluttershy, you came in to visit again. Her mother chuckled happily, leaning down to pick up the little filly, hugging her close as she lay in bed.
Of course, Mother. You know I've always visited you.
Fluttershy chuckled happily as her mother's hair tickled her.
When are you coming home, Mother? I miss you.
As soon as the doctors finished their testing today, her mother smiled happily.
Really?
Fluttershy's face lit up happily. Really? Her mother chuckled happily at her daughter's enthusiasm. They say unless it's serious, I can head home today, since I'll always have your father at home to take care of me. We are so lucky to have him. She smiled.
That's the best doctor in the whole world. She can make you feel better in no time.
Fluttershy smiled happily. Indeed, he will. Fluttershy's mother smiled happily, before turning her head and coughing into a hoof away from her daughter. You really should be resting, came a deeper voice. The two girls turned to see an older Pegasus in a doctor's coat walk into the room.
Daddy!
Fluttershy smiled happily. Hello, dear. Hello, you two. He smiled and walked closer. How are you feeling today? Better, but my stay here helped. But I'm eager to get home and be with my little one. Mother smiled, rubbing Fluttershy's head happily. You'll be resting here too. You know, you may feel better, but you're not cured yet. But we'll find the cure. Don't you worry. Her father smiled. He looked tired, like he hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in a long time. I know you will, dear. We'll be a happy family again before long. Her mother said happily before the images faded away. Alright, before we continue, let me look in chat. Yeah, because a good read does build up quite a bit of thirst. That is true. Oh god, this is going to be a dive bomb into sadness real quick. But what is Silent Hill about anyways? Well, Silent Hill is a psychological horror game where it takes but it takes on the elements which is survival, trauma, and well, learning more of your inner demons. Where the protagonist goes into the titular place called Silent Hill, and it's very well known to have a very thick fog that overlays the town, and it would eventually overshifts into the other world, where much more dangerous monsters would lie inside. And through there, the players, especially the first and second protagonists of Silent Hill 2, get to explore the town and learning more of the secrets inside of it. But those secrets are not about are yes about the town, but most of all about them. One is about the town, but most of all, it's about themselves and how this town actually calls upon them to come and learn and make them confront the horrific truths that they have in deep down. At least that's how I see when it comes to Silent Hill. I mean, Silent Hill 2 is actually the titular child of the series, where it's very well known for its own tackling of the psychological horror, and as well as the protagonist who has to go through the said place. Does that actually help answer your question, Phantom? So, screwed up therapy. Yes, and a bit no. Alright. With that said, let us continue. Fluttershy didn't know what to make of the images. After they had gone through the room, that had returned to the state of decay as the rest of the hospital was in. The furniture and cloth was destroyed and old, with the smell of mildew hitting her nose.
Mother,
Fluttershy said quietly. She remembered that memory now, though when she had tried to remember it before, it was hazy. But now it was coming clear as could be. She had wondered why, what reason her memories would have been for hiding her mother till they showed up like this. She took a closer look at the room, but nothing else seemed to pop out to her. She frowned a little, hoping she could find something a little more to remember, but it didn't seem like she'd be offered any. She slowly turned back to the door and walked back into the hallway. She let out a soft sigh as she tried to gather her thoughts and try to calm her down. She walked further down the hall before her eyes caught the sign that was lit up above the doors. The sign read ER. She hesitated for a moment. She hadn't been in the ER section of a hospital before, and she was worried about what she would find. However, she gulped down her fears and quickly entered the double doors. She looked around, not seeing any creatures, but the scent of blood caught her nose. She looked down on the ground and saw a trail of blood leading down to the ER's hallway, as if something had been dragged a pony's body down in it. Her gut told her that following this trail was the right way to go, but she dreaded what she would find. She didn't want to see a bleeding corpse. With another gulp, she began to follow the trail of blood. The trail led under a door and into the end of the hallway, a door that looked like it was used for surgery. She carefully pushed the door open, walking into the room. It was indeed a room for surgery. Torn apart privacy curtains hung from the rusted metal rails. A window for observation was broken on one side of the room. A tray filled with rusted medical items that lay to a nearby broken table. Various machines and devices lay in various pieces around the room. The disinfecting sink was coated with a layer of blood. The blood trailed at the end in the middle of the room, leading into a large pool of blood that lay just underneath the surgical table. On the top of the table was a wooden blood-stained box with a padlock to it. The padlock had a dial for it turning numbers to open it. Fluttershy carefully walked up to the box and examined it, before noticing a bit of extra blood on the table that had been formed into words. Turn, turn, turn. The letters turned into numbers. The last words was smudged, but it had all been written in blood. She was surprised it wasn't all the more smudged. She carefully placed the hoof against the padlock and looked at the 4 dials on it. Each dial went from 1 to 9, creating a 4-digit number code to unlock the box.
The note says that the code was the word hide, and the words here say something about turning the letters.
Fluttershy thought quietly for a moment, trying to tell her brain what it meant. Suddenly it seemed to come to her, as she placed another hoof against the dial and began turning the numbers.
8, 9, 4, 5.
She said out loud, as she turned all the numbers for what she thought must be the right combination. The padlock clicked, releasing its iron grip onto the wooden box. Fluttershy smiled happily at her own ingenious before carefully moving the padlock aside to open the box. Inside was what she expected. The other gem was Celestia's eye, though this one was a dark shade of blue instead of orange that the other eye was. Fluttershy carefully put the jewel in her bag, ready to leave the surgical room. She turned and exited the room, only to be met with a loud hissing of her music box once more. Her head instantly looked down to the hallway, seeing the same kind of nurse heading towards her, blocking her off the path of the hallway. Fluttershy looked around, not sure what to do, not wanting to get attacked, but having nowhere else to run. She did the only thing she could do and pressed herself against the wall. With that, she very slowly began to walk towards the nurse, hoping the nurse would ignore her and let her slip by. The nurse's head turned to snap and look at Fluttershy. As she got almost side by side it, Fluttershy stopped in her tracks as the nurse stopped as well. The nurse seemed to be staring at Fluttershy through its bandaged face. Fluttershy couldn't see the eyes, but she knew they were staring deeply at her. Fluttershy stared back in return, as she could feel the cold sweat beginning to form on her forehead. The two of them were standing off, and Fluttershy didn't want to be the first pony to move. The tension was thick, only to be cut by the hissing of the music box, telling Fluttershy that she was in danger. The two of them were in a standoff, and Fluttershy didn't want... No, wait, my bad. The nurse, finally, but slowly, turned its head away from Fluttershy before walking past her, heading for the surgical room Fluttershy had just left from. Fluttershy let off a soft sigh of air that she'd been holding in from the tension. The nurse turned around instantly, and it suddenly let out a wailing, ear-piercing cry. Fluttershy jumped, running out from the ER's hallway as fast as she could. She turned down this testing hallway, running straight for the stairs to the second floor, where her music box hissed even louder as she hit the wall of the thick air that could squeeze down as if it was trying to suffocate her. She skidded to a stop as her whole body felt terror. The dark creature was standing before her once more. It roared at her as its fat white mouth opened, the jagged teeth coming down swiftly. Fluttershy's instincts reacted as she raised a hoof to defend herself. The jagged teeth bored down into her leg. Fluttershy let out a scream of agony as if her flesh was on fire. The dark creature twisted its head before quickly snapping it back, picking it up and tossing Fluttershy by her leg. Fluttershy slammed into a wall, the air escaping her lungs soared through as pain soared through her. She coughed and gagged on the thick air as the dark creature began to walk towards her, wanting to strike her out once more. Fluttershy scrambled to her legs, her injured leg slipping, causing her to crash and face first into the floor, eliciting another yelp as her bruised face was struck. She managed to turn her head to look at the creature through blurry, tear-filled eyes. It was drawing too close. She had escaped. She had to escape. She had to get up and run. Instinct struck against her wings to spread out as she flapped them desperately, trying to pick up her body to get away. Get away quickly! She had to get to the mural of Celestia. Jagged teeth bored down into her wing. Fluttershy screamed even louder than she had before. Her sensitive wings punctured in several places. The dark creature twisted its head again, though this time a loud crack was heard as the bone in her wing snapped. Fluttershy's body flailed once more as her screams echoed through the hallway. The dark creature let go of the maimed wing, seeming to grin happily at its accomplishment. As tears streamed down her face, her legs finally found traction. Fluttershy pushed with all of her might against the floor, just barely managed to put distance between her and the dark creature. She could barely see, her vision blurred by pain and tears. She smacked into the end of the hallway, crying as pain shot through her body from the force of the impact. She shakily looked down to the hallway, seeing the blurry outline of the dark creature heading straight towards her, continuing its slow pace. She reached her good hoof out in front and found the door before her. With haste, she opened, stumbling out. She quickly blinked, whirling her head around. She was on the outside. She was on the other side of the lobby. She knew where she was. She could go through the other door, make it upstairs, and then she could go to the mural. Her music box had yet to cease its hissing as the figure came into her blurry vision. Fluttershy turned and ran, only looking back to see the blurry outline of the nurse had been walking towards her. She stripped against the receptionist's chair and lay scattered behind the desk. She didn't have time to let the pain set in. She had to get up. She had to scramble into her feet and reach to the other door. The moment she entered the hallway to the patient's rooms, another ear-piercing wail cried out. Fluttershy just barely made it in time to see the nurse raised up one of its hind legs, and as the front legs came rushing straight at her, Fluttershy felt the hooves striking her face as she was sent tumbling back into the wall. She panted as she got back up and tried to look around. She could no longer see out of one eye. Only half of the world came to her vision. She made out the image of the nurse walking towards her, barely even giving her the time to realize she was been hit. Fluttershy pushed off against the wall and ran past the nurse wailing at her as she ran by. She could barely see. Her hoof hit the staircase with a thud, sending her face into the stairs once more. Her head was throbbing so much she wasn't sure what was happening to her body anymore. She could only see what she could get up and keep running. She had to get to the mural. It was her way out. It had to be her way out. She climbed to the stairs to the second floor. She wasn't sure how she did it, but she had managed it. She kept running. She wasn't even sure how she was keeping up her pace with her body, but her legs were running. She made sure to turn down the second floor hallway as the blurry image of the mural came to the sight. She ran straight for it, skidding to a stop right before it. The music box let out a loud hiss as the air began to feel thick. Fluttershy reached into her bag and pulled out the blue eye. The air began to feel like it was pressing down on her, going to crush her body. She fumbled with the eye, fumbling to put it into the right slot. It nearly fell off from her hooves. She shifted it hastily into place. She couldn't breathe. The air and pressure was too strong. She swore she could feel the breath in the back of her neck as the blue gem clicked into place. The two gems let out a bright light as a loud cry came from her side. The mural began to move, disappearing into the wall. In its place was another dark hallway. Fluttershy ran for it. She ran through the hallway, ran away from the pressure and the thick air. It was chasing her. The creature was following her down to the hallway, her chest once more on fire, but she couldn't stop. An office opened up at the end of the hallway. A simple office and a desk with filing cabinets and chairs on an office space. Fluttershy crashed into the desk, throwing her hooves over it, and she panted in desperation. Her vision was impaired so much now. She could only make out the outline of the furniture in the office. The air grew thick once more. She turned her head in fear, watching as the dark creature was drawing closer. Its body covered with its blood-covered white smile and jagged teeth shone underneath its red, glaring eyes. She couldn't see anything but its face. Her breath sounded loud. Her panting was loud as the beating of her heart in her ears. There was no escaping this time. The mural had led her to a dead end. There was no escape now. Her vision was filled with a dark creature. It was going to kill her. She will die here, and her friends will never know what happened to her. She muttered an apology under her breath as her face continued to be drenched in tears. The creature was upon her, and her breath stopped. The pressure of the creature's presence was enough to feel like it would stop her heart. It opened its mouth as it was going to bore its fangs down to her one last time. It stopped. The creature had stopped moving. Something has forced the creature to not kill her. Fluttershy meekly stared at the creature, not understanding what was happening. It was the opportunity to kill her. Why wasn't it taking it? Her ears twitched and she heard the reason. Somewhere in the distance, a siren was going off. The dark creature before her began to disappear, as if the siren had called it forth, then summoned it back. The darkness that surrounds the creature's body seemed to burn up. The entire creature went up in black fire before her, disappearing before it could finish her. The music box ceased its hissing, and the creature vanished, leaving her in the office by herself. Fluttershy's mind was hazed over. She could barely see. She couldn't understand what was going on. But she dragged herself over to where she could hear the sound. Her body is on its own now, without its guidance. Her body stepped on the top of a platform, one where she wasn't sure she had been there when she entered the room. She felt her body collapse on top of it, laying herself down as she panted. The platform began to move. She wasn't sure how or why, but she didn't care. It was moving up, as if it was taking her away from the hospital. The platform was moving into the ceiling, through a dark path that she could see that was around her. Wait, where was I? Oh, fuck. The platform began to move. See, okay. Let me repeat that, chat. The platform began to move. She wasn't sure how or why, but she didn't care. It was moving up. It was taking her away from the hospital. The platform was moving into the ceiling, through a dark path she couldn't see that was around her. But she knew she wasn't in danger anymore. The pain was becoming real to her now. Her face came to her attention first. She felt the swelling around her eye. She was probably bleeding a lot from her face, but it was hard to tell. Her leg was no longer useful. Using it so heavily in her panic state while it was injured, it had gone probably numb to her. She could have done irreversible harm to it. It probably would never work the same way again. She could barely make out the blood pouring from it. Her wing, the creature had snapped her wing, broken it. She couldn't help but remark that Pegasus' wings were strong and sturdy. One could not normally break it with a twist of the head. They weren't like birds' wings that were fragile. They were strong enough to lift the entire body of a pony. But hers was broken now. She wasn't sure how or it could be fixed or not. The one thing she knew about broken wings was that there could be two ways. A way that they could be used again, or they will never be usable again. There was very little leeway. Her thoughts were distant when the platform came to a stop. It had reached to its destination. She panted heavily. Her body wanted to stay and collapsed, absorb the pain. The pain that was trying to drive her mad. The only thing that was keeping her sane was the thoughts of what damage that had done to her and what she could do to fix it. But she knew she wasn't trying to. But she knew she had to at least get up. If she didn't, she couldn't start fixing her wounds. She tried to stand up. She put the energy in her legs, but they refused to stand her up. She carefully blinked on her one usable eye, trying to open it more than it was, but it refused against her actions. She tried to flap her good wing, but it was pressed against the platform of her body. She panted, but she was too tired to panic anymore. She was yelling at herself to get up, but her body was refusing now. No.
Oh man, that was a good one!
Pinky giggled happily. Fluttershy's eye closed tightly, wanting to escape the pain with sleep, but she forced it open.
Man, you pulled the best pranks, Pinkie Pie!
Rainbow Dash laughed alongside the pink pony. Her good front leg lifted weakly off her body, and she very carefully placed the hoof against the ground.
That was pretty funny.
Fluttershy giggled, covering her mouth with her hooves. Her leg started to lift the front of her body up. Her body jerked into his refusal, but she held herself back up. Her back legs began to weakly move now.
I told you you'd be enjoying yourself,
Rainbow said, gritting, putting a hoof over Fluttershy's shoulder. Her back legs slowly moved, placing their hooves against the ground. She lifted herself up. She was standing again. She could feel herself dripping. She was losing blood.
It's all in good fun after all.
Pinky laughed, bouncing up to Fluttershy.
After all, who doesn't love to share a good laugh?
She grinned brightly. Uh, wait. Things went quiet on your end, Phantome? Can you at least hear my voice that is actually coming through?
Wait, thanks.
Oh, okay. My voice is going through. Okay. On three legs, she slowly began to walk. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she could feel the need to go forward.
You're right. I'm still not sure if I'm that good at them, but I love doing them with you too.
Fluttershy smiled. She loved being around her friends. They gave her such strength. She didn't know what she would do without her friends. Fluttershy stopped before a mirror. She could see herself now. She could see the bruised half of her face, swelling around her eye, her maimed wing, her bleeding leg. She was a mess. With very careful precision, she dropped her saddlebag onto the ground. Using her good hoof, she opened up the bag and pulled out a health drink.
I think that's enough for one day. We should totally do this again.
Rainbow Dash grinned at Fluttershy.
Oh, yes. I'd love to. Doing this again would make me happy.
Fluttershy grinned happily. She could ask for nothing more than to spend another day in the loving care of her friends. End of chapter 4. Alright, let me take a look at chat. You good, Phantome? I mean, we have, that encounter was with, I think I'm going to call it the Beast, was actually, terrifying to say at least, to put it in writing. The Beast and the nurse, if you will. I feel like this will make sleeping a little bit more harder now. It'd be like that though. Okay, but thank you so much for the hydrate. I'm now gonna finally redeem that. Alright, that's not so bad. I think we got enough in us to actually go for chapter 5, and we'll see how we can continue from there. I hope you guys are ready, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a little bit more where that came from. Alright, let us begin. With chapter 5. With all of her weight, Fluttershy managed to snap the end of a mop handle. It was just the right size she needed. She gripped it tightly in her mouth, breathing heavily through her nose. Her mind was reeling. Her body was fighting against her decision, but it was one she had already chosen to make. She carefully looked at the back of the mirror. Her body was starting to shake. She carefully raised the hoof up, her body screaming out as it touched the tender spot. She bit down harder onto the stick. Her breathing was stirred into a panicked breathing. The health drink had numbed down some of the pain, but it couldn't numb this. She had one shot to do this right, as she watched to make sure she did it right. She couldn't close her eye. Her heart throbbed in her throat. She could feel every fast and deep breath she took. Her hoof positioned itself correctly. She readied herself as best as she could, and then a swift motion moved her hoof. Crack! Fluttershy screamed into the broom handle like she had never screamed before. The pain was intense and instant, like a red-hot knife piercing into the back of her mind. Her body collapsed once more as she felt fresh tears poured out from her eye, laying there as she tried to recover from the pain. She lay there, twitching as her wing throbbed constantly now, in more pain than she had been before. She forced herself to stand up. Looking at the mirror, She had to make sure she had snapped it back into the place correctly. Through her eye, she looked at the wing carefully. Despite being covered in blood, hurting like it never felt pain before, she could see that the wing was in the correct shape as it should been. Let's see. Wait. You can hear again. Oh, that's good. I was actually a little bit worried there because I thought that would mean my OBS is actually acting up again, but my Twitch actually was able to record my voice, so that's good at least. Okay, where was I? Okay. Despite being covered in blood and hurting like she'd never felt before, she could see that the wing was in correct shape as it should be. She managed to snap it back correctly. She prayed that it would be enough to keep it usable once it's finished healing. She lay down onto her back and held her injured wings straight as best as she could. Only having one hoof to mend her wounds was a pain, but she could work around it. She carefully placed the stick of her wing to keep it straight, hoping it would also help making sure that her wing was healed. She carefully grabbed the bandages and proceeded to wrap her wings with the stick. It was excruciating, but once her wing is wrapped, she finished taking care of her wounds. She panted heavily as she carefully picked herself up, looking back into the mirror and see everything that she had done. Her face was half covered now, wrapped in bandages so that only her good eye was visible. Her hoof was bandaged now and was raised in a sling that had been carefully tied around her neck, just below her lantern so that she could fit both her neck. Her body has been rewrapped for the third time as well to make sure that the first wounds that she had received were healing well. And finally, her wing was wrapped in a makeshift cast that she managed to get it lay flat against her body. She sighed at the state of her. My bad. It might have been it might have been an issue with my connection. Fair enough, Phantomy. She sighed at the state of that her body was in. She had a hard time believing that this was all real. Yet there was no doubt the pain she felt.
If Rainbow Dash or Pinkie Pie are hurt, could they take care of their wounds?
Fluttershy frowned, looking at herself.
Rainbow Dash is reckless, but she is also strong. She might be alright. She could fight against herself the monsters here, but Pinkie Pie...
She shook her head.
No, Pinkie Pie's done this before. As hard as it is to believe, she'll be fine too. Both of my friends are fine.
She smiled to herself in the mirror, trying to force herself to be reassured, but it wasn't working at all. She frowned again before looking away from herself.
I hope they are.
She turned and looked around her surroundings. She had wound up in the bathroom after the lift ride. Though it seems like the effects of the drenched, rotting world had been left behind for the moment. The bathroom looked like it had been fallen into disuse, but nowhere near the levels of the hospital had. She had found the mop in the corner of the room, though it had looked like it's been used for ages. It was time for her to leave, though. She had to go find her friends. She carefully slipped the saddlebag back onto her back, and she very carefully coordinated her 3 hooves. Walking out of the bathroom, she walked out into a cool breeze, wincing that a little bit of cold bit against her freshly bandaged wounds. She looked around as best as she could where she was, but it seems like the night had fallen, shrouding the world in a veil of darkness.
Has it been half a day?
Fluttershy has asked herself in a shock. She hadn't felt much time pass, but maybe because of her condition, she was having a difficulty with being a good judge of time. She carefully turned her lantern on and illuminated the path before her. There was a dirt road before her, opening wide before narrowing into the forest. She looked around and noticing the buildings that she had walked out of. She knew where she was. It was a boathouse that sat on the edge of Crystal Lake just outside of Ponyville. That meant she was only a short walk away from Ponyville. She could be there in just a minute or two.
Hold on, Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie. I'm coming for you.
Fluttershy said, determined, before moving as quickly as she could down to the path of Ponyville. She was having trouble coordinating three hooves correctly, especially with trying to trot into the town. She was wobbly on her legs, most likely the side effect of not having rested enough.
Jesus Christ, Sarah! Why?
Really? Just right there in the middle of the moment? Okay. Okay. I'm okay. I just need to continue where I left off then. Okay. Okay, I may have to go back to the beginning a little bit. She was having trouble coordinating three hooves correctly, especially with trying to trot into town. She was wobbly on her legs, most likely a side effect of not having rested enough, but she kept going forward. Her determination to see her friends was the strongest factor of driving her mind right now. Love you too, Mickey. Of course you would. Of course you too. Love you too, Sarah, but the fuck? Twigs in the forest snapped. Strange noises crept through the leaves. She swore she could hear the soft wails in the distant trees, but she forced her mind off the sounds. She had just moved past them, moved into Ponyville. The path began to open up before her. The dirt path quickly began to replace by the stone streets of Ponyville. The trees spread apart as she saw the first signs of homes of Ponyville. She smiled at herself as she returned, happily to be back in a place that seemed more normal than where she was for the last half of the day. Her music box began to hiss, stopping at her tracks.
Oh no, they're here too.
Fluttershy gulped as she looked into the night, trying to see what caused her music box to hiss. Sliding into view around the ground before her came a creature. It was the basic shape of a pony. However, this creature seems to be no older than a filly reaching marehood. Its body was completely hairless, the skin of the creature looking as if it's been deeply bruised all over. Many parts of the skin dead or dying, while other parts seemed freshly and healthy in comparison. Its ears were folded down, melded into its face, in such a way that its eyes were covered. Its long legs pushed its body against the ground. Its front hooves seemed to be strapped down to its back, as if it was tied down to its own skin, melding with its body. As the creature was crawled forward, it let out a strange, screeching cry, not unlike that of the rustled metal grinding, unpleasant to the ears, yet sad and wailing. Fluttershy gulped as the creature seemed to be pushing itself all over the place, unable to move into a straight line. Her instinct was to feel sympathy for the creature. Her gut told her it was a creature to be pitied, that it needed her help. Then, an image of the dark creature appeared in her mind. She carefully stepped around, slowly getting away from the creature, before running deeper into the wood. She slipped away from the creature, her music box finally going back to silence. She panted softly, looking over to the shoulder of her direction that she had left the creature. it didn't seem to be able to follow her, which didn't surprise her considering it didn't seem to be capable of moving into a straight line. She let out a soft sigh, grateful that she could avoid the creature. She really only had enough bandages left to wrap up one more wound at best, and she didn't know where she would need it. She carefully began to look around, trying to focus into the buildings around her. She blinked her eye once more to focus. If she knew where she was in Ponyville, she could navigate her way around.
Huh?
She said, quickly turning her head back to a blur. In the distance, as if glowing white like an angel, was an image of a young filly. Fluttershy stared at the filly, not sure what to say or to speak up. She wasn't even sure if it was real or not, but it was a filly just standing in the middle of nowhere. The little filly let out a giggle before turning around and running away from Fluttershy.
Hey! Wait! It's dangerous out here!
Fluttershy cried out, her instincts acting quickly to chase after the filly.
Come back! You shouldn't be alone!
If the filly could hear Fluttershy, she didn't seem to be listening. She just continued to run, turning down a street. Fluttershy followed as quickly as she could. Before she was slow and stumbling now. She cursed at herself for having to let herself get so injured where she needed the help of an innocent fool right now. Her music box hissed, and from the darkness crawled out another one of those monsters that pushed itself along the ground. Fluttershy ran past it, making sure to avoid even touching the creature. Her body was telling her that she had to catch up with this filly. The filly turned around another street, and Fluttershy followed as best as she could, nearly toppling over as she slowed herself down the street with 3 hooves. She quickly passed down the street, when 2 of the monsters burst forth from the darkness, causing the music box to wail. These 2 seemed to be heading straight to her, with no time for her to move out of the way. She gulped before quickly jumping, 2 creatures wiggling their past as she landed behind them. She thanked Celestia for avoiding them, before returning her sight to the filly. The filly made one last return, not down from the street, but into a house. Fluttershy felt grateful that the filly had gone inside, but she still hadn't made sure that the filly would be all right. Fluttershy quickly grew closer to the house, looking it over before gasping. The house was in terrible condition. It didn't look like it had been used for years. The windows were boarded. The walls were black. Holes littered its frame. The gentle breeze caused it to groan very slightly. Fluttershy gulped, getting a bad feeling from the house. However, the filly had gone inside the house, so she couldn't leave the poor thing alone. She very carefully walked up to the door and pushed it open, the lantern illuminating the insides. The door opened up into a decrepit living room. The furniture had been eaten by insects. The table lay in pieces on the ground. Most of the doors were sealed off with wooden planks. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust. Fluttershy slowly walked into the house. Her every footsteps made the house creak and groan, as if it was struggling to hold her weight. She looked around the living room. Every floor and every doorway of the floor she was on was completely sealed. There was no way for her to get through any of them. On top of that, she couldn't see a single sign of the filly that entered in the house. She turned her attention to the stairs, the only path that had been barred off by wooden planks. If the filly had gone anywhere, she must have gone upstairs. Fluttershy slowly made her way to the staircase, looking up its length. She very carefully began to climb up, testing each step to make sure it held her. As she worked on climbing the stairs with just 3 hooves, she found herself doing surprisingly well. Despite the creaking, the moaning constant threat of the collapse, she made it on the top of the stairs. She looked around. To her left was a door that was blocked up by more wooden panels. To her right was... Fluttershy blinked in confusion. The imagery before her seemed to clash with the rest of the house. The section to the floor right before her that had turned into a red, rusted metal, the door made of the same material. The wall had been stretched into a circle around the door, making the walls rotting and falling apart, while just behind the holes of the wall was a chain-link fence, as if they were holding the wall together. The area gave her a sense that it was supposed to be like a cage. Fluttershy gulped before walking up slowly to the door. She didn't know what was behind the door, but something told her she had to look inside. She had to find a way out was in this room. She carefully put her hoof to the door, took a deep breath for courage, and pushed the door open. The first sound that came to her ears was panting, loud, exasperated panting. Her eyes focused on the image before her, her sight recognizing 2 different hues of pink in the same shape of a pony. It had to be.
Pinkie Pie?
Fluttershy called out to her friend. Panting stopped as the pink form seemed to freeze right in front of her. It slowly turned. As Pinkie's blue eyes came into view, looking to stare at Fluttershy. Fluttershy let out an audible gasp as she instinctively took a step back. Pinkie Pie was covered in blood. Her mane was straight. Her cheeks were wet with tears that she had been crying. Fluttershy's eyes immediately tried to spot or identify any wound, but she didn't see one. The blood of Pinkie hadn't come from her. It came from... Fluttershy's eyes moved down to the ground. Lying on the ground in the pool of her own blood was Pinkie Pie. Though this Pinkie was different. The hair was curly like Pinkie's normally is, but it was wearing a multicolored leather dress with varying wings on its back.
Fluttershy?
The standing Pinkie seemed to gasp as it was finding difficulty breathing.
Pinkie Pie, what happened?
Fluttershy asked in shocked disbelief. She could barely make out the scene before her. Why are there 2 Pinkie Pies? And why was one dead?
Fluttershy!
Pinkie hiccuped as fresh tears began to spill down her cheeks.
Is that really you? Of course it is. Pinkie Pie, why are you...
Fluttershy couldn't finish her sentence. The words were refusing to come out. She couldn't think of how to speak when she needed to say it properly.
Fluttershy? Why are you so hurt?
Pinkie twisted her head as if saying those words struck her pain to her.
What?
Fluttershy asked, confused, before looking down her hoof at her sling. She was hurt, but at the moment she didn't care about that. She cared about what was happening with her friend.
I'm fine, Pinkie. Please, tell me. You're not fine!
Pinkie interrupted her with a yell. Fluttershy took another step back into her shock. She had never heard Pinkie yell like that before.
Fluttershy!
Pinkie visibly shook as more tears came down for the pink pony. Her blue eyes looked at her once more.
Your face is swollen and it's covered in bandages. Your hoof is in a sling. Your body's wrapped up and your wing is in a cast.
Pinky then snapped her head away. Looking at Fluttershy, she sobbed harder. Fluttershy was speechless. It was true. She was in very bad condition at the moment, but seeing her pink party-loving, fun-having friend sob and cry while covered in blood didn't feel right to her. She wanted to help Pinkie Pie more than she wanted to help herself.
Pinkie Pie,
Fluttershy mumbled softly, as if trying to find the right words to comfort her friend.
This is all my fault.
Fluttershy visibly shook as she cried.
I shouldn't have let this happen. I should have protected you. I should have been there.
Pinkie Pie hiccuped and gasped for more breath.
I should have known better than to let Twilight do this. Pinkie, you couldn't have possibly known things would happen this way.
Fluttershy offered her words to Pinkie. Pinkie seemed to stop shaking for a moment before she began to shake again, though this time it was different. Pinkie was laughing. Fluttershy grimaced a little. This wasn't a fun, loving laugh. This was a laugh of a mare whose mind was breaking.
That's to laugh.
Pinkie tried to smile, but her mouth wobbled as she rubbed her face.
I've been through this before. I've done this once before, and I know how horrible this place really is.
Pinkie shook her head.
But despite that, despite knowing everything I do, I let us get brought here anyway.
Pinkie let out a single laugh before the smile was trying to vanish from her face as she hung her head.
Rainbow Dash was right. If I had really cared, I would have said something. I would have told you everything that happens when you come here. I wouldn't have tried to hide the truth for the sake of protecting you from what I've experienced. No, I didn't even speak up because I was selfish. Because I only cared about myself. And so I let this howl fall upon you, Fluttershy.
Fluttershy's mouth fell open as she tried to speak. She didn't honestly believe any of Pinkie's words, but she couldn't say anything that would make her friend not believe them. Her mouth closed as she frowned. She felt so helpless. Pinkie's head slowly turned to look at the corpse at herself, still lying in the ground. Something about that body seemed to spark something inside Pinkie.
But that doesn't mean I'm gonna let my friends die.
She stood up, almost as if she was yelling at the dead Pinkie.
I refuse to be the reason they die. So long as I have my strength in my body, I will not let any of my friends fall victim into this world any longer. So as long as I have a single breath of air in my body, I will fight this world with all of my strength that they can live.
Pinkie was angry. She was panting heavily. She yelled at the corpse. This is one of the moments she had never seen Pinkie go through so many emotions. Emotions that gave Pinkie's words of truth behind everything she said. Words that were personal. Words that she had to speak from her heart. Pinkie slowly turned away from the corpse, looking at Fluttershy with a glare. Fluttershy flinched. Pinky's stare softened when she saw the fear that she was putting in her friend. Pinky rubbed her face one more time, and she pulled onto the soft but sad smile.
Come on, Fluttershy. Let's get out of here.
Pinky said, slowly walking toward. Ah, it's the Fluttershy! Wow! Ow! What the hell? What did that? Revere, why? That. Ow! But yeah. Welcome into the end, reviewer. We're in the middle of doing Silent Ponyville 2, and we're in the middle of chapter 5. Hence why I am sorry that you're a little bit confused in the moment, but Silent Ponyville is kind of like, what if somebody wrote Silent Hill mechanics but in the MLP verse, and our protagonist for this fanfic is, well, Fluttershy, if you will. Sorry, I needed to lighten things up. Okay, fair enough. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah.
Come on, Fluttershy. Let's get out of here.
Pinky said slowly, walking towards her, Fluttershy. Fluttershy could only just softly nod. She turned around and opened up the door back up, walking out into the abandoned house hallway, and slowly followed Pinkie Pie.
So, what brings you here?
Pinkie asked quietly, not looking directly at Fluttershy, but at the hallway before them.
Well,
Fluttershy tried not to stumble over her own words.
I found my way back into the Ponyville after getting separated, and I saw a filly run into the house. I was looking for that filly when I found you.
Fluttershy explained quickly.
So, you saw a filly run in here?
Pinkie asked, making sure she understood. Fluttershy nodded her head.
Did you find her yet?
Fluttershy shook her head.
Then we should try and find her. If there's one thing I've come to realize, things don't just happen without a reason here.
Pinkie said as she began to walk further down the hallway of the second floor. Fluttershy slowly followed after Pinkie. There was silence between the two mares. Fluttershy wanted to speak up. She wanted to say something, but the words only caught into her throat. She felt Pinkie Pie was portraying herself as a monster. But she knew Pinkie wasn't a monster. She was a caring friend who more than anything loved her friends. Pinkie checked the door, opening only to find it locked. She seemed to scrunch her face at the door, before letting it go and continuing on. Leaning the hallway, Fluttershy watched Pinkie Pie as she moved. She seemed to scrutinize small details, looking at her surroundings with intensity. She looked like she didn't want to miss a single detail happening in the house. She seemed determined, focused, like nothing was going to stop her from the mission that she had let herself accomplish. Fluttershy's ears perked up as her heart suddenly dropped. She could hear it. She could hear the siren blaring from the distance.
Pinkie, do you hear that?
Fluttershy asked, terrified of the sound.
Huh? Hear what?
Fluttershy, Pinkie asked, instantly putting her focus on Fluttershy.
You don't hear it?
Fluttershy asked, surprised.
Then maybe it's my imagination. Fluttershy, you don't need to assume anything but here's your imagination,
Pinkie said, emphasizing the words ever.
Tell me what you're hearing. I hear a siren.
Fluttershy mumbled quietly. Pinkie's pupils shrunk as if in instinct.
Fluttershy, stay close to me. Don't leave my side, all right?
Pinkie said, very seriously. Fluttershy nodded her head softly as the Pinky turned her back before continuing down the hallway. As they entered the hallway, they came to another door. Pinky put a hoof up to it, and the door swung open. Inside the door room was a surprise. It was well taken care of. There was a new beige carpet with white walls around the room being lit very fairly. One of the sides of the room was a giant mirror that seemed to encompass the whole wall. Pinky entered the room first, scrutinizing it carefully. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary of the room. There was a small bed in the corner of the desk with drawers. One of the walls of the window was another door, looking similar to a closet. Pinky walked over the desk and examined it, seemingly to be looking for something, opening to the drawers for the clue or answer. Fluttershy slowly walked into the room as she turned off the lantern. She hadn't been expecting the scenery of some kind that had been in the hospital. Everything drenched with water, rotting apart and falling. The room was remarkably serene. Something about it gave her a sense of calm.
Nothing.
Pinky muttered, staring at the desk confused. She then turned her attention to the closet and walked over it. She opened up the door and saw a small walk-in closet that was lined with some clothes and boxes. She stepped inside to investigate for clues. Fluttershy sat down, looking at herself in the mirror. She really did look like a mess. She managed to avoid getting most of her hair in their bandages, so it was helping her to hide the bandaged side of her face. But she still couldn't believe just how much damage she had gotten from her encounter at the hospital.
You'll be okay.
Fluttershy said to herself, raising a hoof up to touch the mirror. The mirror began to become translucent. Fluttershy let out a shocked gasp. On the other side of the mirror, in a room similar to the one she was in, sat Rainbow Dash, staring at the mirror.
Rainbow Dash!
Fluttershy cried out, pressing her hoof harder against the mirror. Rainbow Dash! Pinky cried out inside the closet. She instantly moved to exit the closet, with the door slammed shut in her face. She stared in shock at the door. She tried to force it open, but it was locked tight.
No! No! You let me out right now!
Pinky yelled as she began to open up the door with all her might. Fluttershy couldn't believe that Rainbow Dash was on the other side of the mirror. She tried to bang her hoof against the mirror, but Dash didn't seem to hear her. Rainbow Dash was just staring blankly from the opposite side of the mirror.
Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash! Rainbow Dash!
Fluttershy cried out with all of her might as she was desperately trying to bang the mirror as hard as she could, trying to get her mirror friend's attention. But Rainbow Dash just sat there, looking confused at the mirror before her. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Fluttershy gasped as the lights grew dimmer, her hoof quickly moving to her lantern to the front to turn it on. The bright light blinded her at the reflection of the mirror, as she would no longer be able to see through it or Rainbow Dash with the light on. She quickly turned the light back off, looking back into Rainbow's room. The door at the back of Rainbow's room opened, though Rainbow still didn't move. Darkness was creeping into the room of the open door, washing it with its mists. Fluttershy's heart sank. From the doorway flared a pair of familiar red eyes. Fluttershy banged into the mirror again, crying as loud as she could.
Rainbow Dash! Behind you!
The dark creature opened its mouth, revealing its wretched white mouth as it slowly walked closer to the sitting Rainbow Dash. But Rainbow Dash didn't move. She only seemed to tilt her head in confusion, looking at the mirror still. Fluttershy as tears began to stream down her face, her hoofs starting to hurt now from how hard she banged at the window. The dark creature stood right behind Rainbow Dash, its white mouth grinning at her as her heart stopped beating. Fluttershy looked right up into its face. The dark creature opened its mouth again in a bigger grin. Fluttershy's heart sunk further into her gut. The dark creature raised its mouth higher. Then it brought its mouth down hard on the top of Rainbow Dash. The mirror turned bright, forcing Fluttershy to shield her eyes from the sudden change. Adjusting her eyes as best as she could, she looked up at the mirror. A soft, sad music box lullaby began to play as Images starts to dance across the mirror.
Don't worry, Ashley. I'll fix you up.
The image was a crying, very young filly Fluttershy. Her pony doll had been torn to pieces. The stuffing spread all around her. The filly was very careful, pushing the stuffing back inside of the torn doll. Before taking a thread and needle, it started very slowly, very shakily, sew the torn pieces back together. A splatter of blood struck the window, making the image turn red before the image changed.
Mother.
Fluttershy called out softly to her mother, who was lying in her bed. The older mare's head seemed to almost snap, as if it was looking at anger at the child. Fluttershy shook at the sight. Never seen her mother look so angry at her before. But the look of the older mare soon softened as she looked at her child. She was tired. "What is it, my child?" she asked, though exhaustion was apparent in her voice.
Dad wanted me to see if you wanted anything to eat.
Fluttershy whimpered softly. "Ha! Food to eat," her mother said with sarcastic bitterness, turning her head to look out from the window of her room. "What's the point of eating? It burns my throat. It makes me sick."
But you need to eat, Mother.
"Oh, I do I?" The old mare glared angrily at her daughter. Another splatter of blood struck the window, causing the image to turn red once more, before the images changed. A smack rang loud as Filly Fluttershy tumbled into the sitting position of the table. Tears sprang from the edges of her eyes as she looked up what had struck her. The nurse pony was glaring at her. "Now, tell me again, how did you break your wing?" She snapped at the little filly who was crying.
I
Fluttershy gulped as she tried to breathe.
fell while trying to fly.
"That's right," the nurse said, then walking over to Fluttershy, picking her up and sending her back down. You broke it trying to fly, you silly filly," the nurse said, as if trying to patronize her. "You need to be much more careful when you try flying. It can be very dangerous to fly." The nurse nodded her head slowly. "Now, let's freshen that cast." Fluttershy could only cry once more. The cast of her wing seemed to be digging into her skin. A third splatter of blood struck the window. The images turned dark. The mirror seemed to turn into a fire of darkness. The mirror burned up completely, disappearing without a trace. Fluttershy sat in darkness, tears streaming from her eyes. She was sitting in the pitch-black room now, unable to see. She was careful and moved her hoof up to her lantern before hesitantly turning it on. The light lit up the room before her. Blood stained the carpet and the walls. but there was no sign of Rainbow Dash or the dark creature. The smell of blood and mildew struck her next, as she could hear the dripping of water around her. The room was now rotting, drenched, as she had returned to that world, the world separate from Ponyville. She had returned to the other world. She had very slowly stood up, lifting her hooves over the wall where the mirror used to exist. She carefully walked around the bloodstain that was all over the floor. She couldn't see the remnant of that told her that Rainbow Dash had been there. Only bloodstain that scoured the room. She hiccuped before gulping, praying that Rainbow Dash hadn't been killed before her eyes. But without a body there, she prayed that she would still be alive. Fluttershy walked up the door to the Rainbow's room and saw something written in blood at the door.
Deep within, there are secrets laid to rest, but we cannot hide forever from the sense of our past. What once was lost will now be found. Bloodstained hooves will arise once more.
Fluttershy couldn't help but realize the words were meant for her, that the image she had just seen were only the beginning. Once she stepped through that door, she was going to learn exactly what those images meant. With a deep breath, and gulping down the heart beating in her throat, she opened the doors and walked inside. End of chapter 5. Well, aside from a few stumbles here and there, because, well, people like to make use of the pillows and actually make things a little bit easier. How is everyone actually treating, how are you guys treating it today? Are you all okay? Is everyone fine? I think we can actually go through chapter 6, and then we might end things here for the night, because I got a very important session 0 to make later this afternoon, and I do not intend to miss it. But how's everyone though? Is everyone okay so far? Let me get myself a swig of water before we continue one more. Oh, thank you for the hydrate, Phantomy. But I already took a swig of water again. Let me see. It wasn't too bad, you say. Well, I did told you that this Silent Ponyville bars elements that is Silent Hill, and that also means going through the psychological horror and trauma. Well, we're going to be seeing more of this as the story delves further. As according to the lines that we saw from the last chapter, I think we're getting closer to the answers as related to Fluttershy's story. Well, at least for this fanfic verse. And I will tell you this right now, folks, it's going to get heavier from here. I mean, not as heavy as chapter 7 and Bunch, but the point still kind of stands. I hope you guys are ready, but stop torturing these ponies, though. They don't deserve it. Oh, don't blame me. Blame it on the writer. Blame it on Samrose. He's the one who made this. But yeah, I guess it's about time we're going to go into the first steps of the answers of the story. And I will say this right here. It's going to get a little bit heavier from here. Chapter 6. The hallway was dark and long. It was old. It was covered with mold, and it rotted to its core. Water fell down the sides of the wall in small streams. The floor had a small pool of water lying about. The hair on the back of Fluttershy's neck stood on end, but she walked forward to the darkness. Each step she echoed of the walls, her hooves splashing against the water of the floor as each time she passed a puddle. She didn't know where she was or where the path was going. She didn't know what happened to Pinkie Pie. She didn't know what happened to Rainbow Dash. She only knew she had to go forward right now. The hall turned. Fluttershy followed. It turned again. She turned as well. The water was growing deeper. Soon each hoof was splashing through water with each step she took. She stumbled for a moment, adjusting to herself to walking through the water with only 3 hooves. But she managed to catch herself. The hallway turned once more. Fluttershy went along. The long-winded corridor seemed to be leading her, guiding her to where it wanted to take her. She had almost no choice in the matter, even if she wanted to feel that she could feel there was no going back on it now, since she has come this far. Once she had crossed that doorway, there was no turning back. Just before the path, the door opened up. Just before her, the path opened and split. A path to her left, a path to her right, and in the middle stood a door right before her. The door was different, though. It wasn't made of the same rotting material as the other doors she had seen, or the rustic metal or anything that would fit in the drenched world that she had found herself in. The door looked exactly the door to her house back in Ponyville, in great condition despite the environment. She carefully walked up to the door and pushed it open as she walked into the room that it led to.
Well, this is the best place I could think of,
Rainbow Dash said, while flying with Fluttershy to the outskirts of Ponyville, to a small empty cottage stood close to the edge of the Everfree Forest. An old for sale sign stood before the property.
No one has lived here since it was so close to the Everfree Forest. But with your love for animals, that might work out for you. Wow, it looks so great.
Fluttershy smiled quietly, walking up to the house. Fluttershy opened up the door and looked inside. The house was dusty from disuse, but everything appeared to be in good condition still. It even came with the furniture wrapped up in the cloth, waiting for someone to unwrap them for use once more. Fluttershy wandered the home as Rainbow Dash entered the house after her. She could see everything she could do with this home. She could make spots for the animals she could live. She could set up a closet to hold her supplies. She could set up several soft chairs for resting and tables for eating. The kitchen seemed to have everything she needed to cook and perfect meals, and water is still running in the bathroom.
Oh, Rainbow Dash, it's perfect.
Fluttershy smiled happily, returning to the living room.
You like it, huh? All right, then I'll buy it for you.
Rainbow grinned. Fluttershy looked at her speechless.
Oh, no, I could never ask you to do that. It's so much money. I can work to pay for it myself.
Fluttershy fumbled her words.
Don't worry about it. This house is like dirt cheap right now, and I made plenty of money for my job here. Heck, they're even talking of promoting me.
Rainbow waved her hoof, but Fluttershy tries to dismiss her worries.
Still, I couldn't ask you to do that for me.
Fluttershy frowned, not wanting to take so much of Rainbow's charity. It was a huge investment just for her. She didn't feel worthy of it.
Hey, just think of this as my apology for running you out on you on school.
Rainbow weakly smiled.
So, in return, you make this house your perfect home, alright? I know you have one in mind, but you used to speak about it all the time when I last saw you.
Rainbow Fluttershy stared at the mirror before her, still stupefied. She slowly looked around the house once more.
The perfect home.
She thought to herself.
Something I never had as a filly, but I have the ability to make my dream come true now.
She smiled softly as she felt tears begin to form gently in the edges of her eyes.
I will.
Fluttershy wiped her eyes gently, turning her face Rainbow Dash.
I'll make this my perfect home.
Before we continue, is everyone okay so far, chat? Let me just stretch up a little bit because I have a feeling. Oh, grab baskets. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Alright. Maybe I can interchange this time around. Alright. Thanks for the hydrate. I just did the swig, but thank you so very much for it. So the room dimmed from the bright light that had filled her vision.
Phantom, why? Dude, I just had water.
This is gonna be my life now. Holy shit. The room dimmed from bright light that had filled her vision. The memories had flooded her vision before she had a chance to prepare them. But now that the memories had faded, she could see the room for what it was. The room was laid out similar to her living room. The room was laid out similar to her living room, though it looked like it had been what it had when she moved in, covered in dust, with cloth covering the furniture. Fluttershy was silent. She wasn't sure what to make of the images she had seen. It was her memory of moving to Ponyville after she had come to find Rainbow Dash. They had an amazing reunion, and when she told Rainbow Dash she was going to move to Ponyville, Dash helped her so much into finding the place to live.
That memory. I don't remember thinking that I didn't have a perfect home before.
Fluttershy speaks softly, surprised by her own thoughts. She didn't doubt that she would have felt that way, but she couldn't remember why she didn't feel that way about her home. A glint of light caught her eye as she turned to look back into the wall of her room. Something was hanging from the wall. She quickly walked up to the item and see it was a key with a mark of a butterfly on it. Not sure what to make of it, she carefully picked up and placed it in her bag. She exited her room, stepping into her hooves into a new fresh. She exited the room, stepping into her hooves into a few inches of deep water of the hallway. She now had a choice: go in the hallway to her left or the one on the right. Taking a guess, she began to walk slowly down to the left path, listening to the sloshing of her hooves as she walked. She didn't walk too far before stopping, staring what before her, perfectly still in the path, blocking her movement. A mannequin seemed to be frozen in place on the path. It was just sitting there. Her music box wasn't making any sound, and it didn't seem like there was a desire to attack, but it seemed to be waiting for her, blocking her path forward. She carefully stepped backwards away from the creature, it soon disappearing from her sights once more. She turned around her and began to head down to the right path, wanting to stay away from any path that leads to monsters if she could avoid it. The right path didn't take long enough, as it became rather abrupt, not too far away from the fork. However, at the end was another door, though this one was different. It wasn't like the door of her cottage. This time, the door reminded her to the one she would see at the back of the flight school. She took a deep breath, slowly pushed the door open, and heading inside. "Now you listen to me," her father said gruffly as the two of them stood outside of the flight school in Cloudsdale. "It's required of you to go to school, so you go every day they have it. You'll do everything the teachers tell you, and you'll come straight home unless you ask permission to do otherwise. And if you're good, I'll likely allow your requests." He sounds very stern. "But every other rule from our home still applies. You don't talk unless spoken to. You don't tell anyone anything unnecessary. You obey everything the adults say, unless I overrule them. Do you understand?"
Yes, sir.
Philly Fluttershy squeaked in her response, never looking at her father in the eye, keeping her head low. "If you understand then I'll see you at home later tonight," he said, turning away from her, spreading his wings out and fly off. For the first time, Fluttershy lifted her head to look where her father was flying away, even though she could see the scalpel adorning his flank, and it flew off. She let out a soft sigh, thankful that he had left. She looked up at the school before her. There were lots of young and old Pegasi flying into the building. Many were hugging and saying goodbye to their parents. Many were meeting up with their friends, and many looked like they were reluctant to head into the school. It was the first day of school. Fluttershy was happy that she'd finally have a reason to be somewhere else other than the home or the hospital. But the faces of so many Pegasi she hadn't met before intimidated her. She was scared of them. She gulped down the lump of throat and began to walk into the school. It seemed almost every other Pegasi was flying inside. She felt like she stood out with a sore hoof walking into the building. But there was a spark of hope in her heart that hadn't been there before. Light faded from the room as the memory came to an end. The room she left in looked like an abandoned school hallway, though cut off short and suddenly erected a wall. Rusted lockers lined up the walls, and a broken clock hung over them. The entire area was covered with dust and disuse.
Was my father always that stern?
Fluttershy wondered to herself, not realizing her father had talked her down like that.
And I was afraid of him. But why was I afraid of my father?
She asked herself, unable to answer that within her memories. Then she realized what was going on.
Deep within, the secrets were laid to rest.
Fluttershy murmured, remembering the puzzle in the door.
This place is showing me memories I forgot. Or, more accurately, memories I suppressed.
Fluttershy felt a lump in her throat form in her throat.
If I forgot these memories, I must have forgotten about them for a reason.
Fluttershy did her best to gulp the lump that had formed into her throat. She walked carefully to the back of the room, noticing that the key was sitting there. She had picked it up, examining it. The key had the shape of a cloud on it. She carefully placed the key in her bag before exiting the room. Her hooves returned to the water-filled hallway once more. She hesitated for a moment. She headed down to the hallway from where the mannequin had been standing there before. It was the next place she had to check. She couldn't go back now. She rounded the bend of the hallway, swallowing to keep her nerves as she drew closer to where the mannequin had been standing. But it was gone now, as if it was standing on guard, waiting for her to see the second memory. It had vanished off from its position. Fluttershy counted her blessings at this. She couldn't handle any more injuries to her body. She imagined that with that state of her body was, any more damage would possibly cause more serious internal injuries, one she couldn't fix herself. She got an internal injury now. If she got an internal injury now, she'll just die a slow, painful death. Every step she was taking was draining her stamina, both physically and mentally. She never imagined walking everywhere under the hooves to be so taxing, but it was. As she continued to follow the curving paths of the hallway, the water began to become shallower as the pathway drew slowly upward. She was now walking to dry ground as the hallway began to open up. She reached the end of the hallway, the path opening up to a large lobby. Her music box began to hiss softly, Fluttershy turning her light to look at the room better. Just at the edge of her light, she saw the nurse pacing. It walked on the other side of the table, the middle of the room, before turning and walking back into the darkness. Fluttershy watched the darkness carefully. When the nurse then reappeared at the edge of her light, it walked the same path that it had been when she first saw it, before it turned and walked back into the darkness. The nurse seemed to be walking in a pattern, as if waiting for something or something to disturb it, to ruin its routine. Fluttershy very carefully drew closer to the table, but the nurse didn't seem to notice her. Fluttershy's eyes turned to the table the nurse kept walking by, seeing something shine on it. It was another key. She paused carefully, waiting for the nurse to walk by and head away from the table, her music box hissing as it stepped closer to Fluttershy, before growing quieter when the nurse stepped away. Once the coast was clear, she quickly walked up to the table and grabbed the key. Before backing up, the nurse got close once more. She examined the key, and seeing there was a symbol of a red cross on it, she placed the key in her bag and looked around the room. Other than the circling nurse, there was the usual scenery of broken chairs and rotted walls. To one side, she could see the extended wall with a door and with a bookshelf on the wall past it. Then, just past the circling nurse, looked like the small hallway, though beyond it was too dark to see at the moment. She carefully walked around the table and, making her way to the door so she could see, she pushed the door open. Heading inside, her music box became quiet as the familiar light flashed before her eyes. Fluttershy whimpered as the nurse applied the alcohol to her cuts.
Oh, don't be such a crybaby.
The nurse rolled her eyes a little before pulling away the cotton ball and placing a band-aid over the wound.
You really should be used to this by now. You're always coming in here with the same problem. Honestly, I don't know why your father just takes care of you at home.
The nurse said begrudgingly as she walked away from the table. Fluttershy sat on the counter.
That's because...
Fluttershy whimpered softly. The nurse snapped back her head at glare at Fluttershy. Fluttershy instantly shut her mouth. She shrunk back onto the table, trying to avoid the glare of the nurse. The nurse, once satisfied that the filly wouldn't say anything, turned her back to the counter, organizing her items. The door of the room clicked open. As Fluttershy sat up straight, her whole body turning stiff as her father strolled into the room before closing the door. Is everything fine with my daughter? Was the first thing he asked. The nurse pony instantly turned to him, her whole face lighting up, as if his mere presence brought her joy.
Oh, of course, sir. You know I always do my finest work you know I always do my finest work when you were asking me to.
The nurse said, batting her eyes flirtatiously at the doctor, smiling with all her might. Fluttershy's father didn't look impressed by the flirtation and turned to look at his daughter. His daughter stand up straight, shivering as she sat on the table, afraid of what her father might do or say. Have you recovered from your accident? Her father asked with a stern, overbearing tone, as if he didn't actually care that she had recovered.
Yes, sir.
Fluttershy stuttered, squeaked, her whole body shaking as she stared straight ahead, not making contact with him. If you are, then leave. You can do as you wish. Just be in the lobby by 9, and I'll take you home. Her father almost growled.
Yes, sir.
Fluttershy instantly jumped off the table and practically bolted out to the room, closing it behind her. She panted outside of the door, and she heard as her heart beat inside her chest. Oh, doctor! Fluttershy heard the nurse almost moan from the inside of the room. She didn't want to stick around to hear more. She ran away from the room. She'd be in the lobby where her father had told her to be, but she'd be as far away from him as she could still till then. The light faded away, revealing a room similar to the one that she had just seen in the vision, only much of it like the rest of the world, falling apart, broken to pieces, covered in dust. A chill ran down Fluttershy's back as she recovered from the returning memories. She was scared of her father. She was scared of him. But she couldn't remember what he did to make her scared of him. But she had an idea.
Did my father abuse me?
She muttered the words to herself. She didn't want to believe what he did, but everything was falling into place that he did. Maybe she was jumping into conclusions. Maybe she was blowing things out of proportion. Maybe he just punished her too severely once by accident and hadn't made amends yet.
Or maybe I'm trying to make excuses for my father.
She sighed out loud as she lowered her head.
I have to know the full story.
Fluttershy said, lifting her head.
If I don't find out now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life.
Fluttershy gulped once more. She walked carefully to the end of the room, where on the table she spotted a similar key to the others that she had gathered. This one seems to have a symbol of a needle. She carefully placed it along with the other keys. She exited the room. The hissing of the music box returned as the pacing nurse returned to her sight. Fluttershy carefully moved her lantern to get a better view of the room, seeing as if she would forget anything. A similar glint caught her eye in the corner of the room. The glint coming from the worn-down bookcase that lay against the wall, just outside of the nurse's pacing range. She waited for the nurse to cycle through the path once more, then quickly rushed over to the bookcase. Making sure that the nurse didn't turn its attention to her, she quickly looked up to the bookcase. It seems to be filled with rotting medical books. Once she saw a lot as a full, but they are illegible now. Hanging loosely on one of the rotted rows was another key. This one with the symbol of a book in it. She carefully placed it in her bag before turning to watch the nurse once more. The only place that she had left to go now was the hallway the nurse seemed to be pacing in front of. Fluttershy watched the nurse carefully. It seemed she had just left a few seconds as best. It seemed she had just had a few seconds at best to run past the nurse and get to the hallway with her by being farthest away as she could. She remembered the last time she got too close to the nurse. It screamed and it had summoned. A cold shiver ran down her back again. She couldn't face that creature again. If she faced it, it will no doubt be able to kill her this time. She took a deep breath and waited. She counted the number of times the nurse walked into the circle before her. She didn't want to screw up the timing, even by a second. 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. She didn't want to move, but she knew she had to. She steeled her nerves, stretching 3 hooves, and crouched down as she aimed to the door. She ran as fast as her hooves could take her past the nurse. Stay as far away as possible. The hallway came up to her on her blind side, but she knew she was there. She turned as soon as she needed and moved onto the hallway from the nurse. She skidded to a halt, and the hallway came to an end abruptly. She had almost run straight into a heavy chained metal door. It took her eye a moment to focus on the door, but once she did, she could see everything. There were 5 padlocks holding the chains to a metal door behind it. That there seemed to be something written on it, but it was blocked off by chains. She recognized each of these symbols of the locks instantly. They matched the keys that she had just gathered from the area. Being careful but swift, she pulled out each key one by one and placed them into the corresponding lock. Each lock and key fell into the ground, seemingly shattering into the ground. When the final lock fell, the chains fell with it. The chains seemed to shatter into pieces across the ground. The door was now free, and she could see what was written in the door. Strains of the heart, chained up memories. Will things be the same? You know what is true. You are not what you think you are, but feelings are strong. They can change everything, or they can change nothing. Experience the sins of another, then perhaps the thread of destiny will make their feelings known. Fluttershy looked at the poem and read it carefully. She read it at least 3 times, not fully understanding what it meant. A shiver ran down her spine as she read it, though. She got this feeling in her gut, in the gut of her stomach. It was the feeling that it was trying to warn her about her future, telling her that she had something important to do once she crossed the door.
I can't be scared of now.
She said out loud to herself quietly, before reaching a hoof up and pushing the door open. Fluttershy almost felt blown back. A wave of heat struck her as the door opened. She shielded her eye from the heat. It felt like an inferno was burning on the other side of the door. She slowly moved her eye from where the fire was coming. The room just before her was undoubtedly covered in flames. Fluttershy's jaw dropped a little, staring into the flames. Fluttershy slowly walked into the room, looking around. She could feel the heat around her, and she was having difficulty discerning the appearance of the room. The door shut behind her as her vision began to clear. She was inside of what looked like the abandoned house that she had entered in Ponyville, only covered in fire. She looked around. The fire was everywhere. It seemed like the house could be burned down to the ground already. Yet It somehow managed to stay upright despite the flames. But something stood out in the flames. Her eye turned to focus the figure that stood in the flame, looking at the picture that hung from the wall. It was a blue Pegasus with a rainbow mane.
Rainbow Dash!
Fluttershy called out, surprised but happy to see her mare friend alive and okay. She tried to draw closer, but a wave of fire seemed to stand between her and Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash continued to stand in the same place, staring at the picture as if she hadn't heard Rainbow Fluttershy called out.
Rainbow Dash?
Fluttershy called out once more. It's all the same, you know. Rainbow Dash muttered quietly, not looking away from the picture.
Huh?
I can't believe I didn't see it before. But it really hasn't been like this. Rainbow Dash closed her eyes for a moment before opening them again. Always running away. Always getting away when I don't care anymore.
Rainbow Dash, what are you talking about?
Rainbow Dash just seemed to pause for a moment before a small laugh came to her. I'm the element of loyalty. What a little crud that is. Rainbow closed her eyes and a small smile faded from her face. All I ever do is abandon. I've never cared about my friends or loved ones. I've only cared about myself. There's a better life for me out there. I don't want to be held down by your rules. I don't care about clearing the sky for you. I don't care for you as a friend anymore. I'm gonna abandon you for my own desires. Dash seemed to be imitated, but seemed to be imitating herself. But
Rainbow Dash, you didn't abandon your friends.
Fluttershy offered a meek protest. Ha! Are you blind? Rainbow Dash half laughed, half cried. After you got separated from us, I abandoned Pinkie Pie to go find you. I yelled at her. I blamed her for getting us into this mess. I said if you died, this would have been her fault. Rainbow Dash shook her head softly. And I've heard you the worst with my abandonment, and you still say I don't? I abandoned you at flight school when you needed me, all because I didn't care about being held down. Rainbow Dash lowered her head, a sad grin in her face as she seemed to be accepting the truth just as much as she's telling it.
That was a long time ago. Things have changed.
You know, Fluttershy, when you join the Water Bolts, there's a minimum 1 year mandatory private training you have to go through to learn all their techniques and flying patterns. To fly in the Wonder Bolts successfully, they perform shows year-round all over Equestria. It almost seems like Rainbow Dash didn't want to say this. When I make my dreams come true, I'm leaving Ponyville. I'm leaving behind my friends. I'm leaving you behind. I'll be abandoning you again once more. Fluttershy's mouth was agape, unable to comprehend Dash's words. No. More accurately, she didn't want to comprehend her words. She felt like needles trying to jab into her heart. But, hey, why should that change now? Dash lifted her head and looked up to the picture before her. I ran away from home. I quit flying school. I gave up my friends because we don't see eye to eye anymore, and I'll get rid of all my friends just for some silly dream. The sad grin returned to Dash's face. I burn all my bridges I've made in my life so that I can never look back at what I've done.
Dash.
I'm sorry you fell in I'm sorry you fell in love with some pony like me, Fluttershy. Rainbow's voice cracked, as if she was holding back her tears. I'm not the one you deserve it. I'm not the one who deserves it. Dash turned away from the picture, putting her back to Fluttershy. You should forget about me. Dash began to walk away, walking towards the doorway. Fluttershy couldn't reach through the burning flames.
Rainbow Dash, wait!
Fluttershy cried out. Rainbow Dash stopped in her tracks for a moment, as if she didn't want to, but she had to hear what Fluttershy needed to say.
Rainbow Dash!
Fluttershy whimpered a little, feeling tears burning in the edges of her eye. She gulped down the lump of throat and lifted her head, saying it with all of her heart.
I need you to be strong right now, alright?
Rainbow Dash didn't react or move right away. She stood there as if the words seemed to sink in slowly. But after a time, she finally spoke up. Alright, was the only word that escaped from Rainbow before she disappeared into the door before her. Being shrouded by the fire that filled the house, for a moment, Fluttershy thought she had seen tears from Dash's face. Fluttershy lowered her head as tears began to fall from her eye, rolling down her cheek and down her chin. She didn't care how hot she felt, or that the fires were still burning so close to her. She just had to cry right now. End of chapter 6. And that's going to be where we're going to leave off from here, fellas. We have actually just a couple of chapters shy from wrapping up Silent Ponyville 2. But unfortunately, we need to pace ourselves. We don't want to make the same mistake that we did last time with, well, the first series of Silent Ponyville, won't we? And I also need to have some time to rest up before I meet up with the session 0 with my friends. But regardless, I did have a lot of fun, I do. And is everyone doing okay after that reading? Let me see. That nurse is a jerk indeed. And this is a terrible Sparrow. Why will she remember any of this? Well, it is said back in our last session of Silent Ponyville that this is a mind delve spell that allows the users to, well, allows the patients to undergo the spell to see the psychological trauma that is buried underneath. It's the only way to help make things go through, and if Pinkie Pie can do it, so do Fluttershy. However, that price is going to be very heavy because by the time next week, we're going to be finally seeing the answer arc of what's the reason behind Fluttershy's trauma. And I will forewarn you right here and there, readers, that the next chapter is going to be very heavy. Like, extremely heavy. But unfortunately, we needed to outpace ourselves. And we'll most likely do this again by next week, Thursday. Most likely going to be the final fanfic of, well, fanfiction reading for Halloween month. Because by the time we're done wrapping up Silent Ponyville 2, we're going to go through the fucking pain train that is my immortal. Oh, help me. But I am going to call it here. And we're going to go to the closing stream. I really do appreciate that some of you guys actually made your way to, well, see this happening, if you will. And let's see who's available right now. Okay. Oh, Alyssa and Melissa is actually on right now. I guess we can actually go and raid her for there. So yeah. So we'll just say the innkeeper sends her regards. And let me see my emotes right there. So yeah, I'm most likely gonna see you guys next time. So this is gonna, okay, no. There we go. Just type that message for her when you guys are ready to go and see Melissa. So we're gonna wrap things up here for now, and we'll continue next week for our finale of reading Silent Ponyville 2. I hope you guys actually enjoy our session today, and I'll see you guys next time. Night.
Yo.